What's up, guys? I'm SaltEMike, and this is your weekend review for November 9th, 2020. Let's jump right into this one. It's a long one. We're going to start out with patch notes. We had one patch this week. It's on the PTU, and it's really not that big of a deal. It's 3.11.1. The main focus here is getting the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo, which is not until November 20th, bug reported. It's only the exterior, too, because we can't go inside yet. It's on Microtech this year instead of Area 18, so like we have for the last 2 years. It was there, so a new place to check it out, which is kind of cool. They also did a few things like adding more time to give a player a criminal rating if they performed an illegal action on you, as well as some bug fixes. Ground vehicles shouldn't fall through the planet anymore. Multi-tool from Prison should now come with this mining attachment attached to it. Rock miners, this one's for you. Ground vehicles shouldn't slide on planets when the vehicle is on. Stow option should work better for picking up gems, so hopefully prisons are not as painful as they have been for the last, since they've been incepted. As we touched on last week, ships should be able to be customizable in Arena Commander now. So it was the 0.1 patch, not 3.12, that they were going to add that. There were more fixes here. Make sure you check the link in the description for the PTU patch notes. We also had 2 monthly reports this week, but as we always do, we'll start with the PU monthly report. Next week, we'll do the Squadron 42 one. Starting out with AI progress, they did a pass on surrender. This is under the AI tab, so obviously this isn't how we surrender. This is how AI surrenders to us. Also, the team is implementing things called character traits, and they gave an example of a coward trait. Quantum travel work for AI. Assuming this has something to do with Intergalactic Aerospace Expo stuff, similar to Invictus maybe, I don't know. Also continuing work on AI being able to take down incoming missiles on like capital ships and stuff. Lastly, this is more of like some subsumption kind of work where they're trying to get AI to be able to prepare their own food, eat with cutlery, things like that. They also added leisure activities like dancing and playing arcade games. For the environment art team, refinery decks are getting finalized for the next release. Basically, they're finished with art, and now they're moving over to audio and lighting / VFX. Also, gas clouds are being continuing to be added to Lagrange points for 3.12. Final art is starting on ship-to-station docking, and they mentioned colonialism. I assume this is their homesteads that they were showing on the ISC update. We'll show more on that later since they gave us another one. Horizon isn't dead. More work is progressing through there. A lot of work actually was progressing through there. They also mentioned that the orbital station is in final art. That's Port Olisar. So we might be seeing some updates on what Port Olisar used to look like versus what it looks like in the future. They also finalized all art for Pyro is what they made it seem like, but I think it's just organics maybe or something. And they'll make another pass when the Pyro system is closer to getting in our hands. My assumption is that sometime next year, hopefully as soon as possible. Ship art. They're continuing work on the Crusader Hercules, which is the big cargo holder from Crusader, but it's hard to tell how far off it is because they're going piece by piece with these monthly reports, and we don't know how many pieces are left. The iridescent shader is being worked on the Talon. More on that later in the sprint report in ISC. Star Runner is almost ready for showtime. They also gave us a few images of its exterior in this report. Weapons art. First pass on the medical gun. I think we saw that a couple weeks ago in a sprint report, as well as other weapons. What I really want to touch on is the fact that they're nearing the end of work on reticles. So we saw that you're able to snipe from very far distances now. This work is related to weapon zeroing and range finding, so it'll make those shots a little bit easier and more fun to pull off. Also, tractor beam attachments art is done, but more work needs to go into it in order to get it actually functioning as a tractor beam. Audio, we would normally skip this part, but we're sharing it because all of their sound designers had to work on the Mercury Star Runner because there were so many moving parts. So hopefully the internals of the ship are quite fun to experience for some time. Backend services, we would also skip this usually, but they're touching on some bug fixes. But the one thing that's worth noting is they address some network code that should eventually lead to more players per server. I know that's What a lot of people are kind of dying for is more interactions with real players, NPCs, just more interactions, right? So hopefully we get that sooner than later. Characters, more creature work. The crab showed up in the background of a video this week. New subscriber flare armors are incoming, as well as 3 full armor sets for the PTU related to mining and bounty hunting. These seem to be you're going to be allowed to remove and swap out backpacks from the concept image that we see here, which appears to be a mining suit. Engineering, this always goes over my head. There's a lot there. So as I usually do, you guys are smart out there. Leave a comment below. Let me know what's going on in this engineering section, and I'll pin it so everybody else can see it. It'll be at the top of the comments. Gameplay, reputation system is continuing to move along. Plan is to roll this out slowly because everything has to change due to this, right? Missions, maybe even like what stations allow you to hang out at them, those kind of things. Asset Manager app is an app that they're, I guess, moving to building blocks within your mobiGlas. This may allow trade of items between each other. And the new Mission Manager app, which is obviously just the current Mission Manager that we have now, updated to allow for dynamic missions. So we hopefully have that soon. The team finally seems to be addressing repair and refuel as well, since that has been so problematic for the last, I don't know, year, or actually forever. So we'll have to replenish missiles and flares through the shopping service. More on how this works in the roadmap update that we'll take in just a few minutes. Vehicle features, there's a bit more here, but I want to touch on just 2 things. They're going to be displaying ship names and serial numbers for ships, thus I think giving the proper identity for us in game. Usually in sci-fi, players are identified by their ship, not the individuals inside. So this is kind of very cool and should add some fun emergent type gameplay, as well as like actual gameplay like stealing ships, spoofing those IDs, bounty hunting, that kind of thing. Also, the Merlin and Connie docking stuff is moving along. The UI is done. They can now spawn both ships together, and there's a few more minor tasks in order to get it finished. They put finished in quotes. I don't know exactly why they were there. My guess would be is because the docking part is done, but there's other tasks that are needed to bring it into the live environment so we can play with it. I wish they would just write that in the monthly report, but I have to try and figure out what those quotes mean for some reason. We did skip down quite a ways down to Turbulent, so again, links for this will be in the description, so feel free to check it out on your own. They have this thing called the Hex tool. I have no idea what it means. It can track org events. It can track reputation and inventories. What is this thing and how does it affect us is what I'm curious. My assumption it has something to do with quantum, but who knows? They also mentioned this Odin tool. No clue what that is. They just mention that they have it, but say nothing about it. So there's a lot of interesting gameplay related things here coming out of the team who just used to make the website. But it's all super cryptic. So I'm curious what this stuff is and what it has to do with. Leave a comment for your guesses down below. UI update. Most of the items here were already mentioned. The refinery deck UI, though, is complete. This essentially means that refining gameplay is going to be here. Pretty exciting. Some sort of functionality to it, we'll have to see. And these refinery decks are going to be very different from cargo decks because there's actually a point in going to them, where the cargo decks at this point are pointless to visit. VFX update works on ships, but the main focus here is that they're continuing to work on SDF tech for the shields. This is super important because so many ships still have shield holes, and this is the tech that resolves that. Moving on to roadmap updates. And again, before we go in, guys, sorry if I'm seeming a little bit down and slow. I'm rushing as fast as I can get through this because I had an issue with the audio at the beginning. I actually made the whole video already and the audio was completely borked, so I have to redo this, so I apologize. Roadmap Roundup, landing services updates. Basically, this just means the shopping service is going to determine the prices for missiles, chaff, and flare when you go through and repair and refuel and rearm. So the rearm is the big one. That's getting the first change. Missile, chaff, and flares are all going to be priced differently now for different types of missiles. Previously, every missile cost 100 credits. Now it's going to be depending on the type of missile. They also updated some cards for cap ships, turrets, torpedoes, cap ship behavior improvements, as well as added new images for the Gemini AO3, as well as the Bearing FS9 LMG. Lastly, they moved to polishing weapon zeroing, which we talked about a little bit earlier for the monthly update. Moving on to the Reddit mode roadmap for Modicius Ithaca, they added ordnance replenishing, which is what we just talked about, and it's 2/3 done already, which is pretty cool. 22% for the mining UI refactor. I think we all know how excited I am for that. Small progress on station-based refining and the Asperia Talons. Large progress on the tractor beam elevator panels. Weapon zeroing is complete, and FPS weapons for the patch. Still no 3.13, which in my opinion is a good thing. I think the first year patch is something they don't even know what's happening until they come back after the holiday break. Video updates. There is a lot to get through here as well. We start out with the interaction update, which they're making these things called zoos, and Calyx explains what they are, basically what they are for us and how they use them in this first clip.
We've been making an interaction zoo, a place to demonstrate all of the different nuanced and complicated interactions that we can get between a bunch of different entities that designers can go take a look at and draw inspiration from to pull into their levels, their ships, their whatever environments we're making.
Okay, pretty cool. Makes a lot of sense to me. Stuff is, it makes a lot of sense to make stuff feel good and be fun before it's ever brought into the game for feedback from us, right? And then you kind of see how we play with it, and if you want to tweak anything and make some changes. They give a few examples on just how much fun and how many things they can do with just doors.
Even with something simple like a control panel, we can explore things like enabling and disabling the proximity sensor so that you have control over whether or not it lets you through automatically or if you have to interact, and make sure it's all working properly. Beyond the control panels, there's the doors themselves, which give us many opportunities for complex and nuanced behaviors. So we've explored things where if you cut the power to a door, it'll stop its behavior. The lights will go out on the control panel and you won't be able to interact with it in that way anymore. But then maybe we make this wedge kit that you physically place on the door, which pries it open, and which allows you then to sneak through. And maybe even past that, there's the locks on the door could be physical and have their own state and have their own health, and if those things get changed, either by some lockpicking gameplay or some damage or some external thing that we could explore even beyond, that you might trigger an alarm.
Super cool. I mean, you would never imagine that doors would have this much action and gameplay related to them until you really see it, so that's pretty cool. Then they did a sprint report where we see the Talon iridescent paint. We also got a scanning update. This is something that I think is probably the biggest thing that we saw the entire week, is that now there's going to be a subsystem UI for scanning, so you can choose to filter out or filter in what you want to be scanning for. So, for example, a combat pilot is not going to want to find a prospector rock in their scans. They're going to want to find other players, right? So, and vice versa. Also, the biggest thing is that you can actually hide from scans behind objects like asteroids, things like that. So it's really going to make combat a lot more dynamic, interesting, and engaging, I think. It'll be a lot of fun. Gas clouds, they took a look at how they look with refinery stations. Looking pretty cool. They also added a few asteroids here because refineries, asteroids make sense. And then they gave the homestead update, which was essentially taking the 2D objects that they showed before and making them 3D. And for me, this is a little bit weird. I think this is something that they know 100% that people are dying to have these things. And I think they're really starting to pull on the players' heartstrings, like they always do with their marketing material. They try to get us excited, but then what ends up happening is these are a ways off. We're not going to be getting these anytime soon, so you really, really need to calm your expectations on things like homesteads, because I don't see these being a possibility anytime soon. They require server meshing, they require iCache, they require full persistence, they require so many things for us to be able to use these, that this is 1 to 2 years away. So them showing these updates now and really showing most of the video was this update, right? Like it was a big chunk of it. I just don't think this is a good thing, because what's eventually going to happen is players are going to get upset with the lack of progress on this feature. and they're gonna wonder why we're upset about things, and these are the reasons why. SCL, we had a Star Citizen Live that had quite a few things to discuss. Starting out with, well, I guess we'll start out with the fact that it was the vehicle feature team, and they're asked the question, what are they working on now?
So as far as right now, we've been working on the missile operator mode, which is coming next year. So it's going to add a lot more functionality to missiles and make them much more critical to kind of the gameplay in combat. And there's going to be a lot more changes around missile gameplay as well when we have this mode. So we're looking at kind of the balance of missiles and torpedoes in general. Because we want the torpedoes and missiles that people to select to have a distinct purpose that they're using them for. And that goes towards the big kind of torpedoes that the Eclipse and Retaliator have. We want those ships to be very impactful in the universe. So when you do get a hit on a big ship, it actually causes a lot of damage. So we're kind of working on that with injunction with the operator mode.
The missile operator mode, they explain that this thing is going to make things better, but they've never actually explained what it is. They talk about it multiple times throughout the video, and nobody knows what it is still. They never explain what it is. So Yogi's description of what he was doing is a little bit more in detail, sort of the same thing though.
So my focus recently was on missile and countermeasure gameplay. So we added a couple of fixes to 3.11 concerning the countermeasures, but it wasn't really the state that we wanted, right? It was just like a couple of band-aids. For 3.12, we've been improving the countermeasure system a lot, so you have more controls over how many countermeasures you're going to drop and all that. But the bulk of that work is somewhat complete now, so we're now shifting over to the the so-called capacitor gameplay, which has like 3 parts to it. So the parts being engines, shields, and weapons. So the weapon part tech is actually already completed. It's been done by the weapon tech team in the last quarter, and now it's for us to finish up the rest and pull these things together and get more exciting combat gameplay out of that.
So capacitors are a thing that will likely change everything, but we don't know when we're going to get them. We don't know exactly how they work because they're still trying to figure that stuff out. So based on his description here, it doesn't feel like this is going to be anything that sneaks into 3.12. So capacitors, likely a next year thing at some point. Big thing is that I learned with the Vandal Mask achievement is that in space, players still fight at incredibly high speeds. So somebody asked, when are we going to be slowed down to those SCM speeds you want us to be fighting at?
Not to give a yes or no answer on this, but we do have another combat summit coming up, where we're going to kind of break down actually where combat speeds should be. So we are aware that the current SCM speed probably isn't as reliable a source for where the players end up actually combating. Even though it is a way of categorizing the ship performance, it doesn't translate to the real world as far as what players are actually combating and their speed. So it is definitely something we're going to review. As far as the overall kind of combat speeds, this is definitely something we are kind of reviewing, and we don't want to just limit it and go, well, combat speed should be this. We want it to organically happen with the systems we build. So there's a lot of thought behind that, which because the speed really does define the combat experience. There's a lot of separate factors in there, but the speed is a really critical part of it.
Okay, having these discussions and summits are all great. They make perfect sense, right? But a lot of thought already went into how to slow us down, and it was with that combat speed update where our weapons won't work as well when flying at high speeds. That didn't work. So the other thing is they said they don't want to just set a cap, right? But in atmosphere, combat is actually quite enjoyable. And the reason why is because there's a cap on how fast you can fly, right? So it makes us stay close. It is more fun. And I know I'm just kind of joking here. They wanted to organically get us down to those points. I assume capacitor gameplay is the thing, but again, they talk about this throughout the show, but they never explain exactly how it's going to achieve these things. So these shows are really supposed to be sort of a back and forth between us and them, and unfortunately when you explain things that are going to be a thing but don't want to explain how they're going to be a thing, it's quite difficult to do that, right? Overheat, also kind of an annoying thing right now, so they were asked how they plan to fix that.
You know, we want heat in general to be more of a long-term consequence, and we want the, you know, management of energy to be the short-term implications. You know, because we don't want players to continuously afterburn, because then that becomes the default gameplay. But, you know, we want players to manage the energy, but not have to worry about the heat. I want the heat to be the long-term consequence of your choices, you know, that you do in combat. So that's probably the best way to describe kind of our, you know, our direction going forwards with heat.
I sort of like this idea as a solution. I actually quite like this idea as a solution. Heat should eventually just be that thing that damages components, but it shouldn't be the thing that decides whether or not they shut down, right? Also, the idea of capacitors is essentially the heat gameplay that we have now, so are people going to like this? Are they going to hate it? It's... these shows sometimes create more questions than answers that they supply, but that's Star Citizen, right? Ships also have incredible balance issues at times, like the Vanguard for right now, for example, is very powerful. It's probably the most powerful ship in the game. And why does this happen so frequently, and what are they going to do to resolve it?
And one goal of the next Combat Summit is also just to create something like a relative ship tuning matrix, so that we have like very precise numbers with which we can compare the ship performances against, or at least setting a goal state, saying, okay, the Gladius, for example, is really good in this area, right, but is really not good in this area, because ultimately we don't want to have like a ship that is really good in everything. We want to have specialization, and we want the ships to have a purpose, right? And like defining all these things, this will all happen next year.
For me, the fact that they didn't already have this is a problem, but they're in the action of resolving that problem by making this team in the first place. So the whole problem wasn't that they didn't have this list, it was that they didn't have this team. They finally made this team. This team has been great in providing progress on the most important feature in the game. And they're slowly getting us there. Hopefully this capacitor thing is good. Hopefully this list that they make sometime next year is going to be really valuable, because something like the Vanguard, you know, should not be as dominant as it is against ships that are more maneuverable than it, like the Gladius, right, for example. Lastly, there was a UI update that they showed last week on ISC, and somebody asked some questions about that, and the answer here really answers my questions that I had for it.
Yeah, but like overall, I wouldn't worry that there's like something is off or something like that. There will be a lot of passes on the way, so there will be contextual information sometimes, and sometimes not. Well, no, we will have contextual information, right? For example, if you don't play with missiles, then there won't be missile data and all that, right? So it will all work out and look great.
Essentially, for me, it was completely full UI. There was so much stuff there. And it was really problematic because it was everywhere. There was stuff all over the place. This contextual discussion means that, like, if I'm not in atmosphere, I'm not going to have an altimeter on the right side, right? If I'm not doing XYZ thing, it's not going to be on the screen. So that was just labeling all the things that are possible, but not all of the things that are going to be on the screen while you're flying. So that was great to hear. Lastly, other updates. This is a short one. We're going to go through this very quickly. There was a lore post on about the new Imperator and who her constituents could be, a Galactopedia update, a countdown to the Expo post, which will eventually link to the schedule of the event. Feel free to check this out. Leave a comment below. Let me know what ships you are excited to check out at this year's event. For me personally, I don't have any specific company. I'm just curious if there's anything new and what those new things are going to be. So with that said, guys, again, sorry for the rush through video, but this is how it had to be because I need to leave for work in an hour and I haven't even started editing yet. So I'm going to do my best to get this, guys, up for you. If I don't get it up today, I'll leave a post. If I don't get it up earlier today, I'll leave a post and have it up late tonight. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.